7:08. Please join me in pledging the flag.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Roll call, please.
Mayor Copeland.
Here.
Kenneth Jones.
Here.
Jeff Guard.
Here.
Melina Meyer.
Here.
Ann Schaefer.
Here.
David Allison.
Here.
And James Weiss is absent. That's a quorum of council.
You missed me, but I'm here too.
Sorry. Mr. Bird.
Move to approve the regular agenda.
Second.
All those in favor of approving the agenda?
Aye.
Okay, the agenda will stand approved as submitted. Does council have any conflicts of interest to declare? Items on the agenda? Okay, hearing none. Communications by and petitions from visitors. Mr. Bittney, are you online with us?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can. Just before you start, is there anybody else online? Okay, so Mr. Bittney is our city lobbyist, John Bittney, and has been keeping very close pace on the pulse of happenings in Juneau, and there have been a lot of questions in the community about the governor's budget and so forth, so he offered to call in and give us an update. So with that, Mr. Bittney.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you for the time, council and folks that are there. The last week down here in Juneau has been one of, I would characterize as pretty high emotion, with the governor's budget coming out last week that I'm sure most have heard of, and I'm going to touch on that mostly here tonight. But also, just as a quick aside here, the House of Representatives finally organized itself yesterday. And I wanted to touch on that briefly because I think that that's a good follow-up to the conversation that I had with council back in October. If you remember, we had chatted about that time prior to the general election. We're looking at trying to determine how the organizations would be coming together, coming out of the election, and to what extent those organizations would have impact going forward on the redistricting of legislative districts effort going forward. And we had talked about conveying to our delegation at that time to take those concerns about having whoever became the president of the Senate and the Speaker of the House, bringing forward the concerns of appointing members to the redistricting board that would look out for coastal communities such as Cordova. Obviously, the election outcome created a majority of Republicans in the Senate. They have a majority caucus on the Senate side now of 14 members. There is all 13 Republicans, all the Republicans that are in the Senate, plus one Democrat, Senator Hoffman from Bethel, and then 6 Democrats in the minority. So the Republicans, Senate President Kathy Giessel from Anchorage, will have an appointment to the redistricting board. The House obviously was another story, and much of it was sort of along the lines of what we had talked about, which was we couldn't obviously have predicted the outcome of the election back in October, but with the way things turned out and the House sort of being evenly split, that appointment to the redistricting board was very much a part of the dynamic that took such a long time for the House to come together. And so I just kind of wanted to sort of track with that conversation we had back there then. Now resulted in a re-election of Bryce Hedgeman from Dillingham as the Speaker of the House in a 25-member majority caucus that's split between Democrats in the House and the Republicans that joined that group. And so that, again, was very much a part of the dynamic in those discussions, and we will get a appointment from a speaker that is recognizes the importance of coastal communities in that. So I know that there's been a lot of drama and sort of political attention on this issue, but hopefully you can appreciate sort of some of the underlying dynamics that are in that. And I think that, we've gotten to this point in a position as, I guess, as good as we can be given all the circumstances. And I really want to, commend the mayor and the council. I mean, the relationships we've built over the last 2, 3, 4 years have really made a difference, and I think it's going to help us going forward in making sure that we're protected in that process. And we'll obviously have more conversations about that as they appoint that redistricting board here sometime between now and September of this year. On the governor's budget, obviously it seems like everything's cut and many things are gone. I'm just going to boil it down instead of getting into numbers tonight. I certainly get as much detail as folks want to get into, but I think what's important is to look at those things that we need to worry about and sort of set aside, if you will, those things that are probably going to take care of themselves due to the stakeholders and constituencies. In particular, for example, I'm talking about the cut that was made to education. I don't know of maybe 1 or 2 legislators in the entire 60-member legislature that supports the cut the governor made to K through 12. Across the aisle, it appears that there's going to be a major pushback in the legislature on that issue. Other things such as like the fish tax that is shared with municipalities was part of a package of bills that the governor introduced that took money away from municipalities across the state, not just shared fish taxes, but also oil and gas property tax revenues that are collected by the cities such as Valdez, the North Slope Borough, and the Kenai Peninsula. And those bills appear to be, well, I'll just say it, they're pretty much dead. So there just doesn't seem to be any support at this point in the legislature for advancing changes in statutes that would be necessary in order to take those local taxes away from municipalities. I'm just kind of looking over the list here real quick. There are some things, obviously, that we are going to have to focus on. One is obviously the Marine Highway system. They've now put out a budget that says that ferry service is going to shut off after October. That is a non-starter for legislators like Senator Burt Stedman, who chairs the Senate Finance Committee and comes from the community of Sitka. There was a presentation by the governor's office this morning on the Marine Highway. Basically what they said was that their budget has a reduced, well, let me back up. It has the summer schedule as we know it now with a reduced schedule in September and then with no schedule after October. And they are planning on coming out with some kind of a report in August on how somehow manage their way out of that. Not a lot of details, a lot of skepticism down here about that went into that. It appears that it was just a numbers issue coming out. In other words, that there was really no management proposal in place. At this time, they're talking about bringing in some sort of a consultant to somehow come up with a better way of running the system that I guess it can be privatized. I believe, I don't know if the mayor, if I know you've reached out to some folks on this issue. I'll let you speak to that, obviously. But obviously, that's one that we're going to have to stay apprised of. The other one is the governor zeroed out the bond debt reimbursement to municipalities for school construction. That's going to have to get put back in. And I think that because that program has such a high impact on areas like Mat-Su, where they've built up a lot of schools, and would have a real high impact on their property taxes. Obviously, there's going to be a real political impact on that program, but that's going to be probably a priority item to try to get back in. And then the last is that the capital budget had the funding removed for the Harbor Matching Grant Program. I think every year since the program has been around, which is going back almost 10 years, there's always been at least $5 million in that program, even when we had bare bones capital budgets. There's support in the legislature for putting that back in, but I want to be clear that we won't actually see that, get that until probably towards the end of session, which, you know, that's going to be sort of an ongoing issue at the time you have your local election. I just want to be forthright about that there is support in the legislature for adding that back in, but again, we're going to have to wait until those negotiations at the end of session to see that. The only thing I would say is I have not had time to look at the Department of Fish and Game's budget to see whatever impact might be in there for some of the local management issues, but I'll be working with Representative Stutz's office in the organization that was announced. She was declared the chair of the Fisheries Committee, so obviously she's going to have a real heavy impact and hand on what comes out of Fish and Game. So I've tried to cover a lot of territory real quick here, but again, I can see that we can kind of narrow down some of the things that we need to work on, and I think that, again, key is that I think, if anything, is we've got good relationships with a lot of folks that are in the leadership positions as both the House and Senate have organized, and we're just going to have to make the most of them going forward. So I hope that's helpful. I know that it's been tough. As an Alaskan myself, it's been almost depressing in some ways, but here we are. Obviously, the negotiations with the governor over the final funding package are going to largely hinge on how much funded for the permanent fund dividend. The leverage on the governor, if you will, is that he made a commitment in his campaign to have a fully funded dividend program. And, you know, while he does hold the power of a line item veto on whatever money gets added back in by the legislature, you cannot veto an appropriation amount. It can only be vetoed down. And so the leverage that they have is whatever amount they will appropriate for the dividend, and that's where the rub is going to be. And that's all I have for now, and I'm happy to try to take any questions, and if there's any information I can try to run it down in detail, the council, and for you, Mayor, just please let me know.
Any questions, Council? Councilman Allison.
Yeah, John, this is David Allison. What's our best strategy for supporting our causes or fighting to keep what we had with the legislature? Do we need to have more presence in Juneau, or do we need to, our letter writing campaigns do anything? What's our best strategy there?
Thank you for the question, Councilman. Obviously, the negotiations and the ultimate package is going to come down to how much is funded for the dividend. And to whatever extent we're comfortable weighing in on that, and that's not an easy question to weigh in on. But, you know, where we're hamstrung is that we, in our community, have one legislator that we share with Kodiak, Yakutat, and other parts of the town. And so, as opposed to Mat-Su and Anchorage, who have multiple legislators for one community, and it comes down to the political pressure that comes upon those mass numbers, and seeing the property, and I think the tax increases that are going to happen at the local level by passing the governor's budget as it's proposed. It's being presented as something that is avoiding taxes on the part of the state in order to give you a full permanent fund dividend. When it's disingenuous in that what it's going to require is taxes at the local level to pay for those things that have to be paid for. So, for example, that's why I talked about the bond debt reimbursement, Dave. It's a debt that's got to be paid. You can't just manage your way around the fact that you owe somebody, a bondholder, money somewhere. That's going to have to get picked up by taxpayers, not just in Cordova, but Mat-Su, Anchorage, Fairbanks, Kenai, et cetera. And so, you know, trying to get these other communities to sort of get on board with the fact of showing that there's going to be, that this is just a tax increase at the local level. You haven't avoided taxes, you've just shifted it to the local government. So I know I'm kind of skirting a little bit around your question, but I think that we have to get these other communities on board to talk about tax increases that they're going to have to put in place in order to get the voters and constituents in those communities to put pressure on and get the votes in the legislature to turn this thing around. I hope that answers your question.
Well, not really. So do you think we should, obviously we should encourage, I saw somebody who was encouraging somebody the other day in the, I don't know if it was a newspaper or Facebook or something, to, all our, to get all of their, we've got one representative and one senator, but we've all got friends all over the state that have other senators and other representatives, and if we can work together on that, but maybe we can try to point out some of the studies that we've done on, or that people have done on our money going to, for example, the Marine Highway money going into Anchorage for that, and I guess by the same token, it's the same with sports and everything else going to other communities. It's we all support each other. So we just need to spread that news, I guess, and get all of as many legislators and senators as we can.
Yeah, I mean, our own legislators are on board. That's the thing. And to some extent, I think this is going to come down to whether or not the three-quarter vote is going to get put together in the legislature which is necessary for a veto override on the governor. That's kind of the talk down here, is how do we get to that 75% mark? And it comes down to the fact that if Cordovans that take the ferries to Anchorage to go do their shopping, and how we're all sort of interconnected, and those businesses in Anchorage need to understand that this is going to impact them, and because that's where the votes are.
Okay, other questions, Council? Councilman Meyer.
So if we contacted a bunch of businesses in Anchorage and got them to write letters, do you think that's something that you would take to some of the Anchorage representatives maybe? Or would that be helpful if we try to get some letters written from Anchorage businesses?
Oh, absolutely. And I think it comes down to things such as the Anchorage Chamber of Commerce, and organizations in Anchorage and that are supposed to represent, the business community, if you will, and the economic, and also, we have our fish processors who are part of, a statewide network, and they have businesses obviously in other areas besides Cordova. So just writing to our own legislators is good and necessary to let them know we're concerned. They need to hear from us, but in order to turn this around, it's going to take sort of that wider state thing, realization, kind of all in this together, and that we're probably going to be looking at a recession statewide if the governor's budget goes through. The Senate Finance Committee today said that they're going to have economists give some presentations here beginning in about 2 weeks. And I think that some of that data and those conversations are going to be what it's going to take to begin to try to get some of the business leaders in our state to realize that if the effort and pressure isn't brought to bear on the legislature, that we're probably looking at a statewide recession, for at least the next 3 to 4 quarters. So, you know, a lot of that is beginning. I don't want to, you know, we don't have to bear this alone, but I think it's good for us to think about who we can reach out and talk to in this regard. You know, I know, like, for example, Jim Jansen from Alaska Marine Lines and Linden is going to be down here in Juneau tomorrow. He's worried and has a meeting with the governor. You know, it's going to take folks at that level to begin to try to get the conversation elevated out there that something's got to be done if the state, you know, or we're going to lose the job. You know, here in Juneau and elsewhere, the loss of 700 state employees, you know, there's not a private sector economy here in their state right now to pick those jobs up. So where are they going to go? And with the governor's budget, when you get it, add in the university and school districts, the numbers we're already seeing now in the preliminary numbers are anywhere from 1,500 to 2,000 more jobs on top of that. So those are those are the numbers we're talking about in terms of economic impact that hopefully are going to start getting the attention of these other areas in the state to realize that you know, we might all get a nice lovely check in the mail in October, but you know, we lost 50% of the value of our home and our properties in exchange for a $3,000 check.
So, council, other questions, and I'm trying to allow plenty of time here because there have been a lot of questions in the community and from different organizations in our school district and so forth about our response to the governor's budget and our strategy, and so I think this is a valuable conversation. Councilman Burton.
Actually, I think my question has to go into the manager's report now that I think about it, so.
Okay.
Disregard.
Further questions, council? Councilman Schaefer.
How does the potential removal of funding for that harbor matching grant program, how would that affect our timeline and planning for application and whatnot? Do we just continue?
That's the one I was going to ask.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Maybe that's better under a different section then, I don't know. Does that impact how we move forward with that plan?
Well, I think it does. I think it's intended to be a package. I think we go back to, you know, annual piecemeal funding until we have another opportunity to do the same thing. You know, the whole point of this application was to double our money.
To follow up on that, then, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, I may be confused, but the vote we're taking on this just gives us the right to go out and get the bonds. We don't have to go get those bonds until we get awarded the grant, right?
Well, Holly, when you wrote that, were they connected or were they mutually exclusive? We had that conversation.
Well, the bond will move forward, and so you will have to comply with the timeline on that bond. And so I think that there will come a point where you'll have to make a determination. If you're authorized to do that, but you don't have the grant, you're going to have to make a determination. But I don't think, and I would want to check with Tom Klinkner, who is your more specialized bond counsel, to make sure I'm not missing something. But I think the answer to that is they are connected. They're not going to move at the same time. Eventually, you will have to move with the bond timeline in order to close and make the agreements and arrangements that you need to make to take on that bond.
So then my follow-up to that, since we're talking about it now, it has to do with the fiscal year that the state runs on. Since their fiscal year won't renew until July 1st, are we trying to get a hold of matching funds that are currently budgeted, or has that been zeroed out? And I'm not sure if John has the answer to that, or you do, or how that's going to work.
Well, I don't know if they've been zeroed out, but I don't know the answer to that.
I think the grant application timeline was going to carry us into the next fiscal year, I'm guessing.
Yeah, I think we were looking at more like October.
Yeah.
October-ish to complete everything. So it obviously it'd be in the new fiscal year.
Other questions?
We're just talking the state tier.
Tier 1.
No, we're
Yeah.
not talking the Tiger grant or the Gold grant. That was
No,
right.
we're only talking the tier 1.
Okay. All right, thank you, Mr. Bitney. Appreciate you calling in.
Thank you, John.
Yeah, thank you. And I'll just add, if I could, as I understand the Harbor Grant Program, the applications come out in the fall. And in this case here, that would be when Cordova would put in its application based on the outcome of the election, obviously. And so it would still be the following fiscal cycle. But you would have, it becomes a question of how many projects might carry over, whether there's any other tier 1s in the current cycle, and that's just information we'll have to try to, I'll get for you. And, you know, in the worst case scenario, what projects would carry forward into the same cycle that we would be seeking funds?
Okay. All right, thank you. Okay, so now we have audience comments regarding agenda items, and be a little lenient on the agenda piece. You can just state your name for the record, please.
Tom Carpenter, 501 Sunnyside Drive. Thanks for being lenient since that work session went a little longer and accommodate the questions. Couple questions, a couple of them having to do with the work session. Number one, I think that it's important that the council take a position on the borough one way or another. I think there's been a lot of concern in the community that that you haven't taken a position, quite frankly, and I think that that's important that you do it. I am opposed to the borough, but I think that that's something that you need to do. Secondly, a lot of it just stems from the discussion that you were just having in regards to the vote that's coming up on the harbor project and the tax that's going to be ensued. I hope the council is extremely careful, because the record that the state has showed in the past in regard to matching grants to projects that Cordova has bonded, i.e. the grade school, and then not followed through on what they told us they were gonna do after we had started the project, worries me a great deal when it comes to rebuilding the harbor. There's no doubt the harbor needs to be rebuilt, but we have to have the funding secured. We can't do it on our own, and if we can't get the matching grant, then we're gonna have to do something else in the time being. But the second thing is, to that part is that there's 5 processors in town, and the way that the 0.5% tax has been worded, this is basically a tax on the processors. The processors are going to be 100% responsible for administering, collecting, implementing, and paying the tax. The city does not have the ability to tax fish like the state under the raw fish tax, but there's a very clear and direct method as to how that money is collected, paid to the state, and then a portion of it comes back to the city. This 100% is dumped upon the shoulders of industry to pay for a harbor that most of them, quite frankly, don't use. Granted, the fishermen use it, and we're all in favor of supporting our fishermen, but really there's only 2 small processors that use the harbor currently, and to be quite frankly, the city has been subsidizing them at a tremendous rate for a long time. So I just think that there's some real questions as to how all this is going to take place if this passes, and I think there's some real questions to, will the state actually follow through? And I just caution the city before they jump into spending this money that they make sure that this is secure. Thank you.
Thank you. Other audience comments on agenda items? Okay, hearing none. Chairperson, oh, sorry. Gotcha.
Hi, I'm Catherine Mead, 104 West Davis. Greetings. I wanted to thank all the city council members, the city mayor, and the city manager for adopting the 2018 Cordova Volunteer Fire Department Constitution and bylaws today. A lot of man hours have gone into updating the Constitution and bylaws. This new update reflects our nonprofit status, our updated mission statement, and it clarifies some language. It will help CVFD with fundraising efforts and complying with the state of Alaska requirements. So the Cordova Volunteer Fire Department Constitution and bylaws were overwhelmingly approved at our regular September 2018 business meeting. And we need the adoption for the city council because of our municipal codes of 3.20160. So, okay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, and thank you for your service as well. Other audience comments? Thank you.
My name is Joni Behrens, and I live at mile 4.5 Copper River Highway. I just want to thank Kenny for your comments. I agree with regards to the borough. I'm opposed to the borough. I agree with Mr. Carpenter's comments also that I do think you guys need to make a stand one way or another. And secondly, with regards to the fire department, I just want you to know that we are all, I can't speak for every person, but across the board, with all the work that's been done, we thank you for considering it because it will be helpful for us in many different ways in the future. Thank you.
Hey, thank you.
I'm Dick Croft, 201 Whiskey Ridge Road, and I want to testify for the Constitution and bylaws of the Cordova Volunteer Fire Department. We need that thing passed, and it's going to help us in the long run, and a lot of folks that were relying on your business. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Other audience comments on agenda items? Okay, thank you. Reports of chairpersons and representatives of boards and commissions. School board.
Good evening. Obviously, budget is a big part of our conversations right now. And a couple of key pieces, although it really was helpful to hear from Mr. Bitney tonight. There's concern about the governor rescinding the additional $20 million from the supplemental budget. For Cordova, we estimate that that's a $66,000 cut. So pretty significant for us. Not sure what's going to happen with that. Because of the volatility of the budget revenues being proposed right now, as we build our budget, and we have had our first budget work session, we're focusing on expenses and paying attention to what we need and really looking at every dollar needed so that when it comes time to defend our budget, we're able to do that. We can't predict what revenues are going to come our way right now, even less than normal, but it doesn't necessarily change the needs of our students. So we're staying focused on that. And I think we'll have to just wait for a while until we hear what's going to happen with the revenues. But that's where we're at in our process.
Okay, so is that $66,000, is that the proposed foundation funding?
No, the $66,000 cut is this year's budget. The budget that was passed last year by the legislature, and they proposed an additional $20 million to be spread across the state. And when the governor proposed his budget reconciliation for this year, he is proposing to rescind that. So that's money that we were already told we were going to have and have planned in this year's budget. That's a problem. Because as you already know, we're already drawing down on our fund balance to cover this year's expenses. So to take another $66,000 hit this year, we're not quite sure how we're going to handle that.
Fortunately, the Anchorage and Matsu numbers are a lot higher than 66,000, and those people have a vote down there too, so.
Yes, which is why we're waiting. Exactly. Obviously, the discussion about the Alaska Marine Highway system has significant impact on the school. So this year, the ferry has already been cut so many times that we've incurred significant expenses just to maintain our minimum travel. And in addition, another factor that sometimes we don't think about is the fact that we have schools who cancel their trips here because they can't get here affordably. So that's happened numerous times. Right now, our students are traveling, they're gonna be gone over a week to try and fit in some of the games that have been canceled and that we have to play in order to stay active in the conference. We've already forfeited one. If we forfeit another, we drop to 8th seed. You know, it has a pretty significant impact. And so then we're also talking about travel for things like we have a group of students who are participating in the Nose Bowl this weekend. A lot more expensive to fly those 5 kids to that competition, and it's their only one of the year. So a lot of impacts on the school district with the ferry being either unreliable or gone completely. In addition to when we think about recruiting teachers, families moving here and maintaining our student population, you know, all of those things that you guys already know. So obviously those are big topics for us right now. The board is meeting on the 2nd and the 3rd to do some policy and strategic planning work sessions. We've got a 4-hour meeting on the 2nd and a 6 to 8 hour meeting on the 3rd to try and meet our goals of having addressed policy regarding school climate and discipline so that we can do some significant revisions to our handbooks and our discipline policies, and then our strategic plan to really lay out our path for the next 3 to 5 years.
Okay, thank you. Let's see, I don't see CCMC. Oh, there we go. Sorry, Krista. Sorry.
Thanks, Kristen Carpenter with the Hospital Authority Board. And last time I reported to you, I was talking about the audit that we received and the fact that there was a weakness cited and that the accounts weren't reconciled. I was talking to the chief financial officer today, and he told me this is what they were going to do, and I said that last time, that they were going to have accounts reconciled by May when the auditors come again to do the 2018 audit. But I just thought it bore going into a little bit more detail. He's just saying that they're basically reconciling the individual elements of the balance sheet. They're looking at the cash and accounts receivable. He's going to do that himself. He's got help doing some of the other line items on the balance sheet, like prepaid insurance, property, accounts payable, what we owe. And so they're just going to go through each of those assets and liabilities in the balance sheet and work on each of those and then consolidate them up into a whole. So that's how that process is working. I wanted to also let folks know that we do have 3 candidates for Hospital Authority Board members. I think there was a little bit of confusion about that, but we've got Gary Graham, Greg Meyer, and Barbara Solomon, who is a nutritionist and is fairly new to town. Her husband, John Stack, has been fishing here for, I think, 20-odd years almost. So she's not completely new to Cordova, but new living here this winter. And today they had their first pediatric clinic. So Dr. Wesley Gifford was here to do pediatrics. He's going to be coming once a quarter. I think it was a pretty busy day for them. And also Scott was telling me that they have filled several permanent positions that they've been advertising for a while. So we now have a permanent physical therapist arriving in May, a radiology tech coming in March, a social worker for Sound Alternatives, which they've been looking for a long time, so that's great. And then also a controller they're hiring, so that position is going to be somebody working with the CFO and helping to just focus on billing and make sure that we're capturing all the charges, that everything is getting billed and moving through the system the way it's supposed to. So I think getting all of those positions filled. I guess that one, the controller, Scott said it's kind of like the business office manager. That position hasn't been filled for about 5 or 6 years. So I think that will help a lot with revenue. So that's my report.
Okay. Any questions, council? Hey, Mr. trying to think. Did you want to speak to MBE or?
Well, yes, I can talk about that. We, I honestly, we're trying to remember the sequence of the last time we spoke, but we had a small group meeting with the city manager, the hospital administrator, myself, Clay, and Karen Kramer from NVE, and Mark Hoover from NVE. I think I did talk about this before. And we just got some notes today on summarizing that meeting. We've been asked to give a little bit of feedback on that. And the next step is gonna be, just seeing, does everybody agree with what the main points were from the last meeting? And then can we go back to our respective groups and advocate for the next steps and talk about going forward? But there's a lot of, I think they felt like they needed time to regroup because there was some feeling that there was some mistrust, and so we're just working on, are we in fact moving forward, I think is one question. And then hopefully that's a yes, and we'll be meeting again as a small group, although I don't think a meeting date has been set, but meeting again as a small group to talk about the kind of the core 6 or 7 points that we came to agreement on, or at least that were raised in the last meeting. So
yeah. And I think that work product will probably go back to the tribal council and youth council to kind of let you know where the process is going. So. Okay, any questions? All right, thank you for your report.
Mr. Mayor.
Yes.
I forgot one thing, may I?
Yes, please.
And I'll come up, is there someone on the phone?
No more.
Not now.
I just realized that our resolution regarding borough formation was not in the packet, which means we didn't get it to you in time, so I apologize for that. But the board did vote and pass a resolution against borough formation at our last meeting.
Okay. So I'll just repeat that, I guess. The school board did pass a resolution of opposition to the borough at their last regular meeting, and that'll come to the council packet, next packet for correspondence. So thank you. We don't have a student council representative tonight, so approval of the consent calendar. Are there any items council wants to remove and address separately? Seeing none, roll call vote, please.
Melina Meyer,
Yes.
Ann Schaefer,
Yes.
James Weiss is absent, Ken Jones,
Yes.
David Allison,
Yes.
Jeff Gard,
Yes.
James Burton.
Yes.
Consent calendar is approved.
Okay.
Move to approve the minutes of January 16th, 2019 regular council meeting and the February 6th, 2019 council public hearing.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, the minutes are approved as submitted. Consideration of bid. We have a council approval of change order, Alaska Department of Transportation Hippie Cove Culvert Relocation Project, page 34. It's a state-funded project that the city is to be reimbursed for.
I move to approve change order 001 for $40,800 for the additional engineering work mandated by ADOT for relocation work on the Hippie Cove Culvert Relocation Project.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. Would you like to discuss your motion, Councilman?
Nope, they're putting in new culverts. We're gonna be reimbursed for their work. Oh.
Further discussion, council?
It's mandated, I just hope they come up with their something.
Yeah.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, motion carries.
Voice vote.
Voice vote, yeah. So reports. I'm just going to add a couple of things and then I guess seek a little guidance from council. There have been a lot of questions about strategy and approaches and responses to the governor's budget and its proposed budget, and now as the legislature is forming. So just to provide some feedback, we've tentatively scheduled a meeting with the governor in April probably kind of late session. This session will almost certainly go to 120 days. So depending on the election outcome, whether that's you know, the manager or assistant mayor or the mayor, new mayor, that's kind of a good time when actual negotiations are happening on the ground. So there's several elements here, and of course, one of the ones that Mr. Bitney mentioned is the Marine Highway System. So we've had you know, participation through Mike Anderson and Sylvia Lang, our representatives on the AMHS Reform Committee that have been participating in those meetings. And Mike Anderson was able to attend the last meeting in person a couple weeks ago, and you may have seen that report that he provided back to council. And essentially that Reform Committee is their primary recommendation has been to look at restructuring the governance and or ownership operation of the system. I've co-written a letter with Native Village of Eac to the administration, to the governor's office, basically, Marine Highway System, basically saying, requested input on, you know, your budget and various items. And so we've been close to the system, and we recognize how it works and doesn't work. And as the tribe and city government, we want to work with you, the administration, to come up with some solutions here. And that's essentially it. It doesn't commit us to anything, but it is just signaling that we want to, rather than just slashing the system all at once, we need to have a transition to something that's going to work. And we've had a voice in helping that system work a lot better in the past. But hopefully, between Southeast Conference's effort and our participation in that, and reaching out to the administration, that we can come up with something that'll work for our community and our school district and for our economy. Another piece of that is I've reached out to Mayor Berkowitz over the last year and a half. We've agreed to co-write a letter to the legislature and the governor supporting the Marine Highway System from Anchorage and Cordova as kind of stakeholders in the Prince William Sound Ferry. And we think that's real powerful because it comes from a large city and a small, a Republican and a Democrat, and it's really just, it's not politics, it's about just base infrastructure and economy. So last year was an election cycle. There was some friction between the mayor and the legislature at that time. I didn't think it was a real good time to put that letter forward. Now is, maybe. So there's several paths, I think, to get that message across. And as you suggested, Councilman Meyer, working through the Anchorage Chamber and businesses, that's really where some of the support needs to come from. And we've had these conversations with Representative Clayman, for instance, and who's on transportation, House Transportation, and helped him understand that economy works in his district. It isn't just about Prince William Sound. So I'm going to try to hit on a couple of these items. AML's another one. Jim Jansen, that's important. They have a lot of infrastructure and business in this town that we aren't getting wharfage on. Now is the time for us to go to our partners like AML and ask them for their help in this climate and the broader economic impacts of some of these discussions. So I think that's the big pieces, unless there's any questions.
Did you say you've, in your letter, it says you're in talks with Alaska Airlines for their freight and customer?
Thank you. So they're Alaska Airlines, Tim Thompson, and their freight service manager are coming to Cordova. So besides the ferry service, we've had reductions in air service. So Raven, Alaska is one piece of that, and maybe we can crack some business open there. We do have Ace Cargo that comes into Cordova daily at 3 a.m. And so that's one option, but the Alaska Airlines freight has been killing us, and they've acknowledged that. So they are coming to Cordova. They're going to meet with myself, Manager Lanning. They kind of requested a smaller group, so 2 of our grocery store managers, the chamber director and a director in Native Village Eac, Karen. Okay. And we're just going to talk about business opportunities and freight service and try to get some more support for that. And that was a conversation I initiated when they asked for a letter of support for the essential access. And of course, we want to support that, but we need their support as well. So I think a lot of businesses are struggling with keeping their store shelves stocked. Councilman Meyer.
I guess I have a question about the Alaska Airlines thing. Are they coming here to talk to you about cargo or fares or passengers to Anchorage?
I think we're going to discuss all the above, but it's primarily centered around cargo.
Okay.
Because as they phased out the combis, we don't have that freight service now. So
once a week, if that.
Once a week, if that. So you may have seen that they did initiate new fares, no frills fares, to kind of be able to compete. So they are offering a little bit better fares, but I know what you're saying.
I think it's something that needs to be brought up to them a lot because we do write letters in support, and you can go to Hawaii for a couple bucks more than you can go to Anchorage. So it's
my niece just booked a trip to Cordova to visit next summer for what it cost us to go to Anchorage. So
yeah, and even last minute fares if they want to do deals like standby day of. I think something like that could work because those planes are going with empty seats, going back here and going down the coast pretty empty anyway. So.
That's exactly one of the lessons we learned on the ferry system. When they dropped the rates, the ridership went way up and their overall revenue went up. So, thank you. Good comments. And we can certainly bring that up. Other questions, suggestions? Okay. City Clerk's report. Did you have anything for Susan, Tia?
I didn't have anything from Susan. I've been working on the assessment notices, and they should go in the mail March 6th. And then there's a 30-day appeal period, and BOE will be April 15th.
And the absentee voting is open.
And the absentee voting is open right now until March 5th, the election.
Okay, great, thank you. I'm going to revert to my report for just a second. I had one other note here. So I've been getting a lot of calls from the press, especially on fisheries issue, but also about the state chamber supporting the governor's budget, even though our own membership in the state chamber wasn't contacted about that. And so I think our engagement and support for fisheries issues is kind of Laney Welch, and we have a lot of people calling, asking about the impacts of the fish tax. So that's a great opportunity to talk about the impacts on our economy, but also about the opportunities here for growth. So I did want to say I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that we did reach out to the governor's office, the new interim, and I think to be Commissioner of Fish and Game and Commercial Fisheries Director and shellfish biologist, and they did kind of reverse that commissioner's permit and open it back up to 30 days. And I see that there are fishermen loading up pots and getting ready to go out fishing. So that's an important piece for us, and that's exactly what Bitney took the governor and said, hey, these opportunities are about local economies and about small businesses and fishermen. And so he did request a face-to-face meeting to talk about that. So we have a bit of an open door with this administration, and we have been getting support for our fisheries issues. So that's a kind of a good sign, actually, and maybe a little unexpected. But and because we have our city attorney here, we have a report available there as well. And then I'll circle back to the manager's report now. I'm not leaving you out.
Well, I'll just say, excuse me, I'm here to answer questions you might have that might come up regarding taxation and some of the options, and take some direction back with me on that if that seems appropriate. I will use my report to check in on that regard. I also wanted to just give you, because I am here, a overview of some areas that you want to be careful with in light of where we are. Right now, there's a lot of changes in Juneau. There's a lot of things that you may want to react to, that you'll need to react to. And when you do that, I just want to remind you to be careful of the Open Meetings Act, because you're going to have to collaborate. You're going to have have that voice, to have it have an impact. You're going to be working together, and probably very quickly. So just make sure that you keep the clerk's office abreast of what you're doing, so that she can help make sure that you do it in a way that complies with disclosure laws and transparency requirements. The other thing I wanted to alert you to is the there is a spirit of transparency that has swept over our state in light of a lot of social media and technological advances. And as a result, we're starting to see emphasis on executive session wording and the propriety of how we go in and out of executive session and what we do. Namely that our agendas give us very clear notifications. Then this is sort of a shift away from a more informal approach in the past. So I'm just flagging that for you. You may see your administration sort of navigate that and your clerk navigate that. You can see change in your language that's very specific and that has those very clear delineations of the reasons why you're going in. It's not because of any fault of the clerk's office or any fault of your prior practice. It's because you want to be as compliant as possible to keep the city away from any unnecessary legal expenses. So that's just something to keep your eye on. So I'm just gonna circle back to the tax question and see if there is, at least for me, if there's any direction for what you might want to see. There are draft ordinances on a lot of what you heard today, and that, you know, we can revisit that at the next council meeting. But if there is something that you guys want to see in that, I think, and I'll check in with City Manager Lanning, but I think this would be a good time to get that direction. Yes?
Council, any questions or guidance? Councilman Allison?
Well, just to be fair to the staff and let them know where this council member's thinking anyway. And my mind might change after this legislative session completes and we see where we're at with that, but I'm currently not in favor of any real new taxes to increase the cost of living for Cordovans. For example, the sales tax, I'm not supportive of that. I would be supportive of the surtax, or whatever we're going to call it, excise tax, on tobacco, alcohol, and marijuana. But unless there's some kind of one of these that can spread that tax amongst more of the community and to offset a reduction in property tax, that's where I would be at. I don't think anyway, that's where I'm at with taxes. I'm not keen on raising the cost of living for those that are trying to live as it is.
Councilman Burton, then Gard.
I echo pretty much everything that Dave said. I don't want to add any additional burden to anybody that lives in Cordova. You know, the idea behind some of the taxes that we passed before was to try to spread that burden outside of the small circle of people that spend 12 months here. So, you know, a sin tax I think I'd be fine with. I don't have any guidance at this point or anything that would be a specific request for me or suggestion even for an increase or a additional tax.
Councilman Gard.
I think we're just a little bit early to be asking for draft resolutions or ordinances or any of that coming back. There's still a lot of philosophy of what we've got to do that we need to figure out as a group yet for where we want to go.
Councilman Schaefer?
Yeah, I still feel like I need to digest what we've learned from this meeting a little time. And also it's hard to know which ones necessarily we want to focus on without knowing just even a ballpark of how much would be gained from like the proposed areas, like what the scale is. You know, you even brought up how if you implement a tax but you only get $50 out of it, it's not necessarily worth pursuing. So without knowing relative scale, and we don't have our philosophy for the next year going, or the next budget cycle going forward, and knowing what we need in order to fund the services for the city. So I don't know, I need a little more time to digest.
Councilman Burton?
I think, and that's a good point. I think that before anybody does anything, the wise thing to do is bring this back up again after your new council is seated at the table. Have a work session about it, you know, maybe towards the end of the legislative session, so you can identify if there's a financial need first, right? And then how big that is, because you're not gonna tax your way out of a $2.5 million hole the way the governor's budget is proposed now anyway. I mean, that would never happen. Just, there's not enough population base here. So identifying what you need to accomplish first would kind of set the stage for what, if any, of these might be effective in doing that.
Councilman Gardner.
Generally speaking, this would all be better to bring up in a budget cycle, but we have some costs that we knew were going to be coming down the road that are staring us in the face before we enter the next budget cycle. Bergerers, the hospital, we've got some fairly major ticket items coming up, and unless we want to don't pass go advance directly to the permanent fund again, at some point in time we'll need to figure out something that's out of cycle here.
Councilman Meyer.
I agree with what everyone said before me too. One thing that I would like to see when we're discussing maybe a new tax too is examples of other communities in Alaska and their tax from it, and maybe just a little background on how it's going or what their tax structure is like for their community. Some places have taxes on certain things, and then they have a sales tax, and like with us, we have our accommodation and sales tax, so it's 12%. They might not have a sales tax, but they might have a bed tax being 3%. So it'd be nice to compare to see where we're at on the scale of taxing in other communities, what they're doing.
There's a really good website. I think it's called Alaska Taxable.
Alaska Taxable.
It's great, but it like
website, yeah.
lists all the different taxes, and then the cities are along one axis, and you can see exactly what taxes they implement and at what rate.
Yeah, that's a great resource for citizens and council. Is the Alaska Taxable publishes that annually, I think. Kind of the tax basis for all the different communities.
So it'd be nice to just have like a little blurb maybe, because we can go onto the website and look at it, but I noticed, well, just one tax in particular, the marijuana tax, it's not updated as quickly. I think it takes a year or two for that site to update new taxes, so sometimes they don't always show up on there.
Well, on my point, I think that's really helpful. I think I will wait for, I think the administration will check in with you. I hope you have some tools. I understand there's more tools you need, but you probably are going to make some policy decisions and budgetary decisions. But I think it's great you're having this conversation now. So, and I feel like from what I'm hearing, my role on this conversation is just sort of stay and just sort of wait for their direction. And administration might come to you with something before that, with some breakdowns of potential revenue and estimates, but I'm gonna back burner myself. Correct, okay. So are there any other questions? Again, I don't get to make an attorney report to you very often, so I don't want to monopolize your time, but I do want to make sure you have access if you have something you want to ask.
I had one more question about the sales tax cap. I know that was something that was already trying to change, and it was voted to reverse it by the community. But that was the one in particular I was curious if other communities have a sales tax cap, how common it is, and how ours rates with other communities. I know you might not know that answer, but.
I can tell you from just communities that I represent or work with regularly, which is probably, so I'm kind of pulling from about 10 communities. So there are many others, obviously. But I would say that caps happen. They happen at higher levels. A lot of times, Cordova's tax structure is very generous to your taxpayers. You do not have a lot of revenue-raising resources that you pull from your community, which is, and you see that in your sales tax model as well as some of your others. So you do have a very, I think that your exemptions as well as your caps reflect that.
Are more generous than the other communities?
To the taxpayer, yes, yeah. I don't know, I mean, I try to be careful with sales tax because I do think sometimes, yeah, there's implementation and collection perks that play into that for how people feel about that, but yes.
So on the initiative, so for 2 years, the council can't overturn that, but what is that process? So, I mean, can the council just simply enact that? Or does it have to go back through an ordinance process again? In other words, you know, the initiative overturned the tax cap, so after 2 years, can council just choose to implement that?
They'll go back to the same process, you know, then it may be challenged again. So I think that is one of the reasons why the conversation, I know council had requested that, and to start that conversation, I know the administration had really wanted to do that in part because the way your ordinance process is structured, you're always involving your voters in the process through alternate mechanisms, which requires a different approach to the conversation than other home rule communities that really just foreclose that voter participation by not having a vote, and then it's done. And so that is not how Cordova operates because of its referendum and other. Well, does that make sense?
That's a nice thing about, and that's a nice thing about bonds, and I think we've seen that when the community understands what a tax or what revenue raising is targeted towards, it generally gets a lot more support. So I just one last question, because I was kind of curious about the the ballot or the election taxes in March. So if raw fish tax revenues can go up and down, and I think I saw from your summary that communities can have their own raw fish tax, but because that is dedicated for a specific use, after you reach a certain revenue threshold, in other words, if you've collected more than you need to pay the bond, council can stay that tax at some point if they want to, right?
Yeah, that's a complicated question. Yes, I mean, I think you have a tax, and so there's a lot of pieces to that, because you also will get approval for taxes that you may not necessarily need approval for, but you want approval for, and there's actually common law cases on how do you then change that and remove the tax, change the tax. Do you have to do it by a vote? Can you just remove it? You have bond requirements, obviously, but when you're getting that revenue and that dedicated, that reason is no longer there, then there's an argument that we're mandated to, that the taxes, in essence, it ends as a byproduct of the authorization for it. So that is something that, as your attorney, I should give you attorney-client privileged legal advice on first, and also understand what I'm saying, so I'm not saying something. This is sort of a generalized answer and give you very specific, but it's an excellent question, because it might be a question that I know you have when is your informational session with the Harvard?
It's the 27th.
So that'll be an answer that I'll make sure you're prepared, and anybody or city manager Lanning is prepared. Whoever's going to be at that. Yeah. That they're prepared with that information.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Would that be okay?
Yeah, I think just based on tonight's testimony, it'd be kind of nice to know if we have some good raw fish tax years, for example, that we're not over collecting, and there's a mechanism to adjust that rate or something. So, okay, thank you. Any other questions, council? Okay, city manager's report.
The taxes, I realize we feel like we're very early in that discussion. I think that the tax question was brought forth because of the expressed needs of CCMC. There's a sort of a two-pronged approach here. One is 581 in the rears on PERS. The other one is a second half of the year $600,000 need to stay current on the PERS. We've budgeted $600 for this year, but we know that won't meet the need. So the idea was to get a flavor for what you have a capacity for now, so that we could plan as we got to mid-year or somewhere after mid-year to meet those expenses. The other thing that we're trying to do right now is calculate by reconciling all of our own accounts where our cash capacity is. I said that perhaps we could meet that 581 need in cash if we had to out of our general fund reserve. We don't know the answer to that. We're still trying to reconcile that just because of the way the entries were made, which is not right or wrong. It was just the way the entries were made. We do have the final draft of our audit for 17. And I was looking through that today, and you know, one of the things I was really surprised about, I just had forgotten that at the end of 16 when I arrived, we just laid waste to it, you know, to get it in balance. And now it's interesting to see how that turned out at the end of the year. So we should have the final budget or the final audit next week. I'm gonna knock on wood.
I have a comment on the CCMC PER stuff, and I guess lucky for them, I'm only here for this meeting and one more. But the message that I got was an attitude. So I think there needs to be a correction in attitude in what CCMC perceives this PERS debt is, and it's for, and that it's not something that they could just choose to not pay. Now they've gone through this whole process, salary study, and they gave themselves a whole bunch of raises, and I fundamentally disagree with saying that they're gonna do that, they're gonna adopt that approach, and then turn around and say that they don't want to pay the PERS bills because what was the? I want to get it as close as possible, but it doesn't do anything to benefit their current employees. Sorry, that's just not how it works. So they can't turn around and come to city council every single time because they just don't want to pay that. There has to be a different adoption of a different philosophy down there before we can turn around as a community and start bailing them out hundreds of thousands of dollars above and beyond what we're already doing as a community to subsidize the place. So that's my position there. We have to cross that bridge first.
Well, I don't dispute that at all. I was simply trying to give the basis for why we were talking about taxes, not making approval. Of course, I don't have any control over any of those things but anyway, that's the basis for why you saw the taxes. And obviously we're going to have discussions. What you're going to see in our budget approach is, again, trying to cut and sort of giving you the flavor of, we've been working on a level that's somewhere between, you know, 10.7, $11 million is really where you're, I don't want to say viable, but that's appeared to me to be sort of the level that we were comfortable with. And maybe it's lower than that, and we're still trying to get lower than that. But as you recall, where our funds go, 4.3 million and 4.5 million to other entities. So we're really running about a $6.5 million operation here. And how do we meet those needs? $6 million in personnel costs, 500,000 to operation or projects and operations. And so we're trying to change that as we've approached it, trying to put less money in personnel, have it down to 5, less than 6, and then trying to increase the operation. So that's what you'll see from us, and that's why we're talking about taxes. We don't want to wait till the last minute. We want to get a handle on this because we're only 2 months away from asking for the 20 budget first documents and how fast that's gone. So we're working on that. So the audits, we've been meeting with IBEW for most of today, tomorrow morning, for a while, trying to get a new contract ironed out. As you know, we only approved a one-year deal on the last go-around, trying to sort of get a better handle on our financial position. And then this time we're going to attempt to do a 2.5-year agreement so that we can end the agreement at the end of the fiscal year, and then we can negotiate, have budgets and yearly contract amounts as part of a budget consideration instead of half year, kind of like we do at the school. You know, the school's tough in that way because we're on different fiscal years, so we're going to try to straighten this out. Then the mug up next Wednesday night, 5:30 to 7:30. We're going to do a presentation. We'll have some input from the attorney in that respect. We're going to do a PowerPoint presentation, I hope. And the mayor will be there. We're going to advertise it, post it, so you can all be there, and then we'll try to answer questions from the public as best we're able to. And then, of course, there's going to be some stuff put out by Information Services in the e-newsletter in different places that give sort of a flavor of what the issues are here. So we think that'll be helpful, and I'll be happy to respond to any questions.
Councilman Meyer?
About the matching grant, I know we're not sure how that's gonna play out in Juneau right now, but it's a grant, not a reimbursement, a bond reimbursement. So when the state gives out a grant, is it usually in their timeline from when it was gonna be given to the community, or is it one lump sum, is money sitting in an account somewhere? How does that work? Do you know?
I don't know. I've never received one of these tier grants. Sam, do you know?
I don't know that off the top of my head. It varies. So I'd have to, that's a good question that I'll have on my notes.
When we received the LT2 grant, we paid invoices and then submitted reimbursements. So I'm assuming, because of arbitrage and other issues involved in bonding money and not using it, getting grants and not using it, it's likely that we'd be reimbursed, but I will get the actual answer for you. You know, the bond proceeds go into the bank, and then we access the bond proceeds as we have them, as we need them, I should say.
Other questions, council? Okay, seeing none. We have a correspondence as included in the packet. And I just was going to mention on item 19, the letter or the email from Ellen Americas regarding the Cordova Community Garden. The hospital garden is an area that's set aside for the seniors at the hospital. So I just wanted to mention that they had contacted us to kind of remind us of that. But I pointed her toward Micah Hahn, who is with the University of Anchorage. He's been working with a local group at the corner there just below St. George's Episcopal, and working with DOT to identify how much of that they need for a snow dump, and perhaps using the balance for a community garden. And also there's an opportunity for a grant for apple orchards for some hardy apples. So they're looking for places for that. So just wanted to add that. Councilman Allison.
Does the Native Village need any support or anything with their DNR application, or
they haven't asked for any additional support. This is just part of the 30-day public comment period, I think, that's required from the DNR. So certainly if there are people in the public who would like to, submit favorable comments, I'm sure it would be appreciated. We don't have ordinances or resolutions on this agenda or unfinished business. We have pending agenda, and one item, council, we have on there, of course, is the borough opposition resolution, so.
I would move that we add a action item to adopt a resolution proposing borough at the next city council meeting.
Is there another councilman who would like to see that on the agenda? Okay, I'm saying nod, so yeah, we'll put that on the agenda for next regular meeting. And then,
should I specify which one of
I was just gonna ask, would you prefer that first one or second one, or?
I personally would prefer the second one. It sounded like the rest of the council wanted the first one, so I'd go with the first one as well.
Okay. Councilman Garden?
It sounded like comments from the community that they'd like some clarification for where we were at. From listening to council, it's not gonna put us in any better or worse shape for positioning in case they do try to shove the borough down our throat at a later date. I have no problem with stating that we're opposed to a borough. I just don't think we need to go into the whole litany and list to make enemies and stuff out there. We can just say that, you know, for what we've seen from the information we've gathered with the study, that at this time, the city of Cordova is nothing word of the borough.
Okay, so you're kind of suggesting the first option as well, because that's the more generic. It also has that administrative structure of, you know, setting.
I'm fine with the structure on the first one, but it doesn't say that we're in opposition to a borough.
Gotcha.
All it says on there is that we're ceasing and desisting from any further. So if we put something down there under.
I think it does say
No, it says we
oppose the
oppose
borough. It's at the bottom, or near the bottom.
Oh, we oppose the
Section 1B, yeah.
And it's also in the title, I think.
Okay. The melody runs rampant tonight.
Okay. A couple other pending agenda items. We do have Northern Edge. Alaska Command will be coming to Cordova on March 6th. And I will be on vacation council from March 1st through 10th. So I won't be here for that first meeting in March. And but that would be an important presentation for council and the community. So we do show, we did have the January 29th meeting between Native Village VIAC and some of the city staff as was mentioned, and I think another meeting of that group will be scheduled again soon. I think there's some positive progress being made there. I think the fact that it's taking some time and effort is just a reflection that this is a process that's been 20 years in the making, but I feel like it's moving. So we have the capital priorities list and resolution. I think the last time we looked at that, we felt like we still had a good list to take to the legislature for this session. Capital prioritizing waterfront development. Were there any other items council wanted to see on next meeting's agenda?
A financial report? Maybe I was gonna ask that during the manager's report. I forgot when we would expect from our
Like the
new.
presentation of the audit?
No, from our new finance director. I
Okay.
think he was.
Scheduled for the 20th of March.
Okay.
Item number 7, we're gonna have UBS and the finance department here. We were gonna give you an update tonight, but we're still a month out on reconciliations to be accurate.
Okay.
Okay, anything else for pending agenda, council? Okay, hearing none. Audience participation. Yes. Yes, please, just for the attendees online.
Street. I just wanted to say that the reason I brought up the alcohol and tobacco taxes the first time was because I talked to the hospital administrator and I asked him, and I think I might have already said this at a different meeting, but I asked him what percentage of his ER visits were, alcohol related. And he said about 20% of their ER stuff was alcohol related. So those taxes could go directly to, we could use that as the reasoning for getting those taxes. It's gonna offset hospital costs, and I know that they're not paying their bills like what James was talking about, but this could offset some of their costs. Maybe they'd be able to afford to pay other bills because of that. So that's all I want to say.
Okay, thank you.
Tom Carpenter, 501 Sunnyside Drive. A couple comments. One, I guess that conversation about CCMC and the PERS contributions is quite shocking, actually, to me. I don't know the details. First I've heard of it, but it's also quite shocking to me that a town that subsidizes its hospitals so much, it seems like there were some pretty arbitrary increases in salaries that took place, and in the world we live in, sometimes you don't have the benefit of doing that. So, secondly, in regards to the ferry service, Copper River Seafoods utilizes the ferry more than anyone in Prince William Sound, and it's going to have a pretty dramatic impact on our market availability and also our competitive nature to get fish to the market without the service. So if there is some sort of a letter campaign that goes out, we can direct somebody from our corporate office in Anchorage to surely write something in support of the city of Cordova. We are already currently lobbying in Juneau for the ferry, so hopefully that'll have some impacts. And then lastly, and this was alluded to earlier in conversation with the city attorney, one of the concerns is the way the harbor bond issue, it was presented to the community. It seems apparent to us that it presents itself to the community that it's a very straightforward process, and that there's really no risk at all in the state participating in the process. And I'm not so sure that that's accurately a fair representation of what could possibly go on. Secondly, instituting the 0.5% tax, if that tax was passed and the bond was paid for in 10 years, 5 years, whatever the time frame may be, does that tax stay on the books forever? And can the city council or future city councils manipulate that tax? Because as I said earlier, it's 100% put on the shoulders of the processors to gather and pay that tax to the city. So I think that at that mug up next week, a very clear and descriptive answer to that particular question is one that I have, amongst others, and I won't waste the time here at the city council meeting, but I do have a lot of questions other than that, so thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Tom.
I might just offer that if there is a big list of questions, it seems like it'd be better if you could put me on with somebody, staff or someone, so that those answers could be provided then. Because they're probably really good questions that everyone's going to want to know the answer to, but if you ask them then, they're not prepared for them. They do not have that ready.
Thanks. Other audience participation? Okay, thank you for your input tonight. Council comments. Councilman Guard, start on your corner.
I echo all the comments I have. I can't do that. Thank you for the participation. This goes way better with everybody doing it. Keep pointing in this direction. Keep it up. Thank you.
Councilman Burton?
Yeah, I just echo that. Appreciate the participation from community. Thank you for being here.
Councilman Meyer?
I just encourage everyone to maybe try to write some letters about the Alaska Marine Highway. It's a really important piece to our community, and I'm glad to hear that the Alaska Airlines is coming to have a conversation about fare prices and also the cargo, because not having cargo coming into Cordova and having the ferry is a double blow, and it's going to affect the community.
Councilman Ellison?
Yeah, I would echo those comments as well, and regarding the CCMC thing, I'm right with you, or Councilmember Burton, on that. The attitude and the obligation, or the knowledge of the obligation has to be forthcoming at some point in time. The city is not always going to be there as a backup for the hospital, for the school. You know, we've got our own issues. Obviously, we support those other organizations, but we're not. You can't not make your decisions just because you think you got a big pocket over here. You still gotta run your business like a business. And I've said it before about they have to pay their bills. They know those bills are there. They should be budgeting for them and dealing with it in their budget. They can't just give everybody everything they want, hire as many people as they want, and not pay a couple of bills because they're going to the state, and it's like they're challenging the state to come shut them down. Dunleavy will do it. So we need to be aware of that. I'd like to welcome Robbie back, and thanks for KLAM for always coming here, and Emily and Cordova Times for always being here at our meetings and keeping updated. It hasn't always been where the local press has been involved with council or been here, so we appreciate that. So that's it. Thank you.
Councilman Schaefer?
Just thank everyone for coming and participating, and don't forget to vote on the March 5th election. So, and tell your friends.
Councilman Jones?
Thanks everybody for coming out, and especially want to thank Mayor Clay Copeland for his hard work on the Tanner Crab stuff. Without you putting pressure on the department through your various avenues, we wouldn't have got that season extended back out to 30 days. So I know the fleet appreciates it. We'll be loading pots in the next few days and taking off. So hopefully it's a successful harvest for the community of Cordova.
Thank you.
Can I do one more?
Yes.
I just wanted to qualify one of the things I said about the CCMC deal was when it comes to that PERS issue that was brought up when we were starting to talk about taxes, there's no way, you know, you look at that figure, $581,000 for the arrears, $600,000 going forward. There's no way to come up with $1,181,000 in tax revenue to cover that. We can't take it from somebody else. We're going to take it from the school. You're not going to raise property tax enough to cover that burden. There's just no way to come up with that, and there's no way to go into the permanent fund and grab, you know, enough money to do that every single year. That fund's going to run out. We're going to be cut in other places. So just wanted to kind of clarify my thought process on that. It's got to be in their budget, and that has to be figured out. And it can't come back to us having to fill that void every time. I'm done.
Okay. All right, so tonight we'd scheduled an executive session for the clerk's evaluation, but she is out this evening and won't be able to do that, so we'll just have to move that forward to another agenda because she does have the right to participate. This kind of speaks a little bit to Holly, our council's suggestion that we need to be probably going to have to be more hyper vigilant in our advertising our executive session, so it's clear to the public before the meeting and in the advertisement what we're going to be going into executive session for, and being fully transparent there. So With that, we have one more motion.
Move to adjourn.
Oh, before you move to adjourn,
Yes.
could you move to postpone that executive session
Absolutely.
to a, I would just say to the next meeting and then actually the next meeting, because you were, or get a date certain so it doesn't,
Yes.
you know, just so that you.
Clerk stated she won't be at the next meeting either.
That's right. I would suggest the second March meeting, wherever that lands on the calendar.
March 20.
Is that the
March
20th?
20th?
Yeah, March 20th. So is there a motion to
So
postpone?
moved.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to postpone the clerk's evaluation to the
Was
March
this the
20th.
second, was it?
We're gonna get your March 20th.
Yes.
Someone.
Alaska Airlines permitting. Discussion, Councilman,
Yeah, I'd just like to point out that, this is a contract year for the clerk and we need to, we've got to get those evaluations done.
Yes.
And, we can't keep putting it off and putting it off, putting it off, putting it off. This one's pretty important, to get done as it's, contract year for both the clerk and the manager, so we need to move ahead.
Yes, and I know council scheduled, this is the second time now to do this before the election, before there was turnover, but at least your evaluations were completed and tallied, so. Any further discussion on the motion to postpone? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, the clerk's evaluation will be on the March 20th agenda.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
We're adjourned.